Hi, my name's Mike. I'm from Michigan. I came up with an idea to build my own Cultipacker. I'm going to make a video here, kind of show you the steps I took to put it together, and maybe it'll give you some ideas you can make your own. I built the whole Cultipacker using only two power tools. One tool is a 4.5 inch grinder. I got this at Harbor Freight for $15. You can put a cutting wheel on it, cut all your steel, put a grinding pad on it. You can grind all the rough edges, drill holes, and put a wire brush on it for cleanup at the end. The second power tool I used is a corded drill. Just got it at Home Depot. I had it, not a real high-end one, but it's decent. Okay, the first thing you need to do is find some packer wheels. I ended up finding these on Craigslist. I got 19 of them for $8 a piece. It works out to about $150. These are cast iron. They're used, obviously, but once you get your packer wheels, that'll tell you about the diameter for the axle, and the number of packer wheels will also tell you how wide you can make it. I have 19 of them, so I'm going to make a 6-foot wide Cultipacker. It's got a 2-inch bore, so I'll find an axle that's 1 7/8 inches. Okay, once we have our packer wheels found and we know what size axle we can get, we can start looking for an axle. I called a couple new steel places, 6.5 foot axle, 1 7/8 inches. I was quoted well over $100 from a couple places. I'm from Michigan, I mentioned that already. There's a place on the north end of Grand Rapids called Padnos. It's a big recycle plant, and they sell used steel. They'll let you go there, walk around, see what you can find. Found me an axle, 1 7/8 inches. I paid $24 for it. They'll give you one free cut if you buy a lot of steel. So I had them cut it to size. You can see it's a pretty decent piece of metal. It weighs about 70 pounds. Packer wheel fits on there nice. Turns freely, but it doesn't pop. That's what you're looking for. The next is the end pieces where the bearing's going to attach. It's 2 inches by 2 inches by 1/4 inch thick tubing. I paid $5.50 for all 4 pieces. The top piece is going to be 12 inches long, and the part where the bearing hooks onto, the bottom actually goes this way, is going to be 8 inches long. The next part of the frame is the angle iron. Usually they use 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch by 1/4. They didn't have any of that at Padnos, so I ended up with 3 by 3 by 1/4. It's a little more heavy duty. 2 of them, 6.5 feet long. I paid $23 for them. Next we have the tongue to pull it with. I ended up with a 1 by 2. This is 6 feet long, and then 2 support braces. This is 1 inch channel with 1/2 inch sides. These are both 40 inches long. I paid $1.50 for these 2 pieces and $1.50 for the tongue. And the last piece to make it work is the bearing. I found these online. These were $23 a piece. Came to $50 with shipping for both of them. They're rated at 6,000 pounds each, so 12,000 pounds together. That should be more than enough for what I need. One thing to look for if you're doing anything homemade is these are self-aligning. This is the bearing on the inside part, and this is the casing on the outside. The bearing will actually rotate inside the case, the cast iron here, and that way if you're not in exact alignment and the axle shaft isn't coming in at a perfect 90-degree angle, you won't burn the bearing out. Well, that's all the pieces you need to build the Cultipacker the way I built it. Let's go ahead and get started. First thing I did is I took the end pieces and I drilled the holes in them, 3/4. This is where the angle iron will attach on the outsides and the bearing will attach to the middle. There's a lot of YouTube videos how to drill through heavy steel, so I'm not going to go into that with too much detail. But what worked for me is I measured out where they had to be, and then I drilled a 1/8 inch hole, then a 1/4 inch, then a 3/8, then a 1/2, and so on until I ended up with 3/4. So each one of these holes I ended up drilling 6 times. I found it was a lot easier on the drill to move in little increments like that, and it also kept the bits from heating up. So in just this one end piece, I've got 6, 12, 18, 24 holes on this side, and then another 24 holes on this side. So I have almost 50 holes I drilled in here, times 2 both sides. I have 100. On the bottom piece that's going to hold the bearing, I've got another 12 on this side and another 12 on this side for almost 25. So just in the 2 end pieces I have almost 150 holes drilled. This was by far the most time consuming part. If you had a drill press or something more heavy duty, it would probably be easier, but I wanted to show that you could do it with a hand drill. Once you have all the holes drilled and the bearing mounted, this is pretty much what it's going to look like. Then you have 2 holes on the top here, that's where the angle iron is going to attach to, but this is going to be what your ends are. So basically I have the entire Cultipacker except for all the packer wheels on this pallet right now. I've got my 2 pieces of angle iron, I've got my tongue, my 2 braces, I've got my 6.5 foot axle, I've got my 2 bearings, and the 2 2x2s that I put together for the end pieces. So really when it's set out like that, there's not a whole lot involved. Now that we got the holes drilled in the steel, we'll go ahead and line it up for the angle iron. You can see that the inside of the angle iron here is rounded, and if we put the square end piece in there, we can't get a tight fit because of that roundness. So what I did is I took the grinder and I smoothed the ends off the top parts of both of these end pieces. You can slide them around and you see you get a nice tight fit on both sides. And I just took a pencil, drew a circle inside there, and then I knew where I needed to drill my hole in the angle iron. Now that we've got the holes drilled in the angle iron, we can go ahead and start putting the end pieces on. I've got the other side done already. Make sure you put the ground off part up. Just want to snug everything up finger tight at this point. Go ahead and square it up. Alright, we've got the end pieces in finger tight and we've got it squared up. We'll go ahead and measure. We'll find the exact center. And once we have that marked, I don't know if you can see it, but I've got 2 pencil lines right here where the center is. Put that on there just like that. And what I did is I C-clamped it on, drilled that first hole in there, and once I got that first hole in, then I bolted this piece in. That way I knew where it was going to go. Recheck my square again, and then I drilled a hole in here. I put 2 in each of these, and then I drilled 2 in each of the pieces of angle iron. Alright, I got all my holes drilled. Some 1/2-inch bolts. You'll notice I'm not putting any washers or lock washers on at this point. At this point we're just trying to make sure everything's going to line up. I'll just put the nut in there to hold it in place while I drill the other holes, and that'll help steady it up, keep everything in place. You can see with the edges on that 1-inch channel that creates quite a space under the tongue. So I'm going to go ahead and mark those and then hit them with a grinder to take the edges off so that'll fit flush. There we go. I got those edges ground off. See, it makes a much better fit to the two side brackets to the tongue. Okay, we got the ends ground down on our support braces, all ready to go. Using 3/8 by 1 inch bolts. You see that fits right in the center there, just nice. Any bigger than that, and I don't know if it would go. For this, what I did is I just put them on here and kind of eyeballed where I wanted them. Took my square, came up with a 45-degree angle, and that's what I went with for the first one, and then I measured the diameter out for the second one. There we go. That's pretty much the frame, except for the smaller parts that go on the end caps where the bearing hooks to. Got my wire brush on. Going to try to clean the ends of this axle up a little bit so the bearing will fit on there good. It's a little bit rusty. I'm sitting outside. Okay, now that we have the frame together, the next thing to do is start putting the packers on the axle. There we go. If you get all the packer wheels on and it turns out that your axle isn't centered, the easiest thing to do is just get a board and a sledgehammer and just tap it over a little bit. There we go, I think we're pretty close. Okay, now we're ready to start putting the bearings on. Bearings come with a shaft collar. I always put them on the inside. That way if it comes loose, it's still attached to the axle and you don't lose it. It's got one little nut in there that you can tighten up, and that grips onto the shaft of the axle, and that keeps the axle from sliding in and out of the bearing. That's the only thing that does that, because there's nothing inside the bearing that holds it. And then you can see that the bearing's got a little flange on it, and that hooks right onto there like that, and that holds the axle so it doesn't slide out. And the next piece will go right on here, and then we'll flip this frame over and we'll put that on next. One more thing that shaft collar does is it also creates a space between the wheel and the bearing. If that wasn't in there, then that wheel would rub right up against the edge of that bearing and would wear that out. Alright, just like the other side. Shaft collar on there first. Line that right up with our bearing. Remember, it's got a groove right on the inside that shaft collar slides into. Alright, this is where you have to be a little patient. Everything's got to line up just right at this point. There we go. Alright, all the bolts are in. The first one I did on the far side that I couldn't get to line up, the hole was off by about 1/8 of an inch between the two of them. So I got out my second power tool, clamped her together and ran the drill through it once, and just taking that 1/8 of an inch off, then the bolt slid right in. And now that everything is together and everything's finger tight, I'm going to go ahead and take it apart. I'm going to leave the bearings on the axle because that's lined up where it needs to be. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up those lock collars to hold the packer wheels where they are, and then I'll grind everything down, put a coat of primer on it, paint it up, and we should be in business. Going to start cleaning up the angle iron. Got my wire brush on here. I hope it goes without saying, but eye protection is an absolute must with this. These little wires do come loose and they do fly off at a pretty high rate of speed. Good leather gloves and hearing protection are also an absolute with something like this. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there that tell you how to paint. I'm not going to go into that with too much detail. Basically what I do is I go over it with the wire brush to get all the loose off. Once all the loose is off, then I get a pre-cleaner like Prep-Sol, and I wipe the whole thing down twice to get all the grease and oil off. Got quite a bit of oil on it from drilling the holes. Once I have that done, then I prime it and paint it. I always use the same brand primer and paint. I try not to mix them. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but I figure if it's the same company, it probably works good together. Okay, got the second coat of primer on. I'll let this dry, recommended 48 hours, and then we'll go ahead and paint it with the color. I got some 2-inch wide by 1/4 inch thick straight stock. I cut it off in 2 8-inch long pieces. Then I took my grinder with the cutoff wheel and I cut the corners off just to make it a little nicer. I'm going to put them together in the vise like this, hit the ends with a grinder, and that way they'll be identical and smooth the edges all out. There we go. Getting the light here. You can see that they're nice and even now. All the edges are smooth and they're just about identical. So now I can go ahead and I'll start drilling the holes in them to hook them onto the tongue. Got the coupler put together on the end of the tongue. Everything painted and put together. We'll hook it up to the tractor and we'll see how it rolls.